I'm going to have you in mind for the brocha, and I'm even having Marco in mind. I hope he makes a good refuah shalom. He's not well. So Marco Kupovitz, just let us know how you're doing, my friend. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzenu v'tzetzei amcha beit Yisrael, kulanu yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamlemei Torah l'amo Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bacha banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notenu Torah.
Amen.
All right, so guys, I just wanted to do a summary yesterday of where we started off, and then just go through this quickly. We started off on 8A1, all right, and how this works is as follows. There was Rav Abba from Akronia that asked of the other Rav Abba. He said, this started off, I think, on 7B. I think 7B4, 7B3. And he said that, do we calculate the value of the property that's owing based on the debtor's own land, or do we calculate it on the value of the land compared to world standards? Okay? And the reason why this came up is because of the following two brises that are brought. Now, the brises that are brought, just a prequel to the brises I'm about to bring, is that if a landowner has 3 tracts of land and he damaged somebody's property, he always pays for that damage via his superior land. If he owes a debt, he pays it with average land. And for a woman's ketubah, it's paid on inferior quality land. Obviously, it goes without saying, if he's only got one grade of land, they all pay on that grade of land. In other words, if he only has superior, damages, lender, and work ketubah of a woman is paid with that. Same with inferior and average. So the ideal circumstance is when he has 3 tracts of land. And it goes through in 7B4 and 7B3, the different sort of options available. Now we finally get to 801, and it says, right, the Bryce is going to teach the middle case. And the 2 Bryces deal with this middle case. So in other words, if the landowner possesses average and inferior land, damages and the lender are paid with average land, and the ketubah of the woman is paid with inferior land. Okay? And then the second Bryce states something quite different. It says, if a debtor possesses average and inferior land, damages are paid with average land, and the lender and the ketubah of the woman are paid with inferior land. So let's just see the difference. The difference is very clear. Whenever there's damages, you always pay from the best land that you have, whether or not you've got different grades of land or a single grade of land. So that's damages taken care of. When you pay in the ketubah of a woman, you pay with inferior land, no matter how many different tracts and grades you've got. So that takes care of that. So the only thing in question here is the average land. So in the first Bryce, it discusses a case where the lender is paid with average land, and the second Bryce discusses the case where the lender is paid with inferior land. And what we want to know is why. One of the reasons that Rav Abba of Akronia was asking this is because of some of the issues that are going to come up now. There are 4 possible ways to look at these differences of the Bryce, and we're going to go one at a time. So the first thing of it is we have to analyze the first Bryce, and that Bryce is as follows. Damages are paid, damages are paid with the average land, and the lender is paid with average land, and the ketubah of the woman is paid with inferior land. So right, we're going to see now, with regards to the lender being paid with average land, what's the case? Now, it's bringing this. It says, now if you say that they assess the quality of the land in terms of the payer's own field, let his average land become regarded as superior land, for it is the best land that he possesses, and let the lender be pushed aside to collect from inferior land. The fact that the Brisa rules that the lender collects from the average land would seem to indicate that they assess what is considered the damager's best land in terms of the world at large. So what is it saying here? This is why Rav Abba Vakronia asked this. He said, look, if the guy doesn't have a superior tract of land, okay, and he's only got average land and inferior land, we know that damages are paid with the best land that he's got. But we don't understand why it would work in terms of the debtor's own land, because if he only had average grade land, according to the world at large, for example, but it was the best land that he owned, the debtor, then that is considered superior land from the debtor's point of view. So then it must be saying there has to be a factor at which the land is compared, meaning it can't be the debtor's own land, because the debtor's own land, he's only got average and inferior. And compared to what he has, his average land is the best he has, therefore it's superior. So therefore it must be assessing that it's average in terms of the world at large. Okay. Now, before we go on, do the three of you understand this in terms of the question being asked?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So the Gemara deflects the proof and it says, hang on a second. It's not talking about the world at large. What it's saying is as follows, is it's actually discussing what is superior in terms of the payer's own land. And here in the Brisa, with what are we dealing? We're dealing with a case where a debtor possessed superior land at the time the loan took place, but subsequently sold it. The average land thus became mortgaged to the lender as soon as the loan was made, and all agree that he may collect from it, even though it later became the debtor's superior land. So Rav Chisda is saying as follows. He's saying, look, at the time that he was lent money, the borrower was lent money, the borrower actually had superior quality land. And this was the situation when the fellow Jew lent him money, that he had average land, and therefore he's entitled to pay back with average land. Later he became a little bit more indebted and sold a superior quality land because it was easy to sell and he generated the most amount of funds. And then he came to the person, the lender that he owed money to, and said, listen, I want to give you inferior quality land. And the person that lent him money said, nothing doing. When we had this arrangement, the situation is you had 3 grades of land, and you have to honor your obligation because that property became mortgaged to me. The fact that you sold it later and now your average land has become superior in the sense that it's the best land that you own, it has nothing to do with me. At the time we made the arrangement, in fact, you had 3 grades of land, and the property lien was on the average quality of land, and therefore you owe me average quality land. That was the situation when I lent you money. Okay, and the Gemara provides support for this interpretation of Rav Chisda. So the explanation of the Brisa is also reasonable. And then when we go to the second Brisa, it's going to make sense. So the second Brisa says, if the debtor possessed average and inferior land, damages are paid with average land, and the lender and the ketubah of the woman are paid with inferior land. So these two Brisas seem to contradict each other because, again, don't worry about damages. They're always paid from the best land that the landowner has, and the ketubah of a woman are always paid from inferior land. But here in the case of the lender is only paid with inferior quality land. And why is this? Because at the time when he borrowed money, he never had superior quality land. All he ever had were 2 tracts of land, average and inferior. And since the average quality of land was the best land that he had, that went to pay for damages of which he owed. And the lender could only collect from the inferior grade of land, the same as the ketubah of the woman. And why? Because there's a biblical enactment stating that, in fact, the lender is only entitled to collect from inferior quality land because generally a person is poor, and if they had money, they wouldn't be borrowing money. So probably they only have inferior quality of land to give. So that was the biblical default position. The rabbis were then worried that the door would be locked in the face of prospective borrowers because it's very difficult to sell inferior land. And therefore, the lender didn't want to lend money to the borrower because to be paid back in inferior land, he would go through quite a schlep to sell it. So what they did is they upgraded in respect to collections that the lender would be paid back in average quality land. But bear in mind, it's not for the sake of the lender. It's for the sake of the borrower in order that people borrow money and be allowed to do so without much objection from the lender. So in other words, it's to enhance the power of the borrower. It's not for the lender's sake. But it reverts back to the biblical enactment when the person doesn't have an average grade of land. So the second brisa, Rav Chisda is saying, listen, the guy never had superior quality land at the time of the contract. He only had average and inferior. And because his average land was superior, the best he had, that went towards damages. And his inferior land is what you pay the ketubah of the woman and the lender back. Does that make sense, guys?
100%. I needed to.
So the case of Rav Chisda is talking about a case that we assess in terms of the debtor's own quality of land. It has nothing to do with the world at large. And we explained how to deal with these two conflicting brises to where it makes sense. So what it's stating is, rather, we should not conclude from this that the correct interpretation of the brisa is as follows. Here in the first brisa, we deal with the case where the debtor had superior land at the time the loan took place, but subsequently sold it. While here in the second brisa, we deal with the case where the debtor did not have superior land and subsequently sell it. The fact that the contradiction between brises can only be resolved in this manner supports the interpretation that was advanced by the Gemara above, vis-a-vis that the first brisa speaks of a case where the debtor originally possessed superior land and subsequently sold it. So that's according to Rav Chisda. So that makes sense of how he managed to deal with the two brises. Then the Gemara refutes this specific claim, and it says that you can interpret it another way. It says, if you wish, you can say both brises speak of where the debtor did not have superior land and subsequently sell it. And both brises can be explained as ascribing to the opinion that they assess what is considered superior land in terms of the properties of the world at large. Yet there is no difficulty. For this second brisa speaks of a case where the debtor's average land is equivalent to the superior land of the world at large, while here in the first brisa speaks of a case where the debtor's average land is not equivalent in quality to the superior land of the world at large. Okay, so let me just unpack that for you and say what it's saying. It's not arguing with Rav Chisda. All it's saying is that there is another way to look at it, because it's not the only way to look at it that it's according to the debtor's land. In other words, we see the value through the debtor's point of view of the land that he has. This is using an example where the debtor's land is compared to the value of the land of the world at large. So the first brisa, let's see what this states, that you pay the lender with average quality land. Again, you pay damages with your best land, ketubah with the inferior land. But in the first brisa, it says you pay the lender with average quality land. So here it's talking about in the first brisa where the lender's average quality land is comparable to average quality of land in the world at large. Does that make sense? It's equal. The general perspectives of what average land is worth in the world at large is the same in this case as the lender's average land. It matches. In the second brisa, where you pay the lender back with inferior quality land, it's because it might be inferior land for the debtor, for the person that owns the land. But according to world standards, it's actually average quality land, because his average quality land at which he pays the damages is equivalent by world standards to superior quality land. So again, the second price is saying, listen, this guy owns really, really quality land. He once upon a time might have had superior land, or he doesn't. It doesn't matter. The fact of it is, even his average land is graded to superior land according to world standards. And his inferior quality land is literally like the quality standards of average land of the world at large. So therefore, he pays damages through his average quality land, which is worldwide standard like superior land. And his inferior quality land, inferior to him, is by world standards average quality land. And by that, he pays the lender back with inferior quality land. If we compare it to the world at large compared to the debtor's own properties. Does that make sense in the second explanation, guys? That's on page 8. We're going on page 882. The Gemara has thus reconciled the conflicting rulings of the Brisos in two possible ways. According to the first, both Brisos subscribe to the view that we assess what is considered superior in terms of the debtor's own land, while according to the second, both Brisos subscribe to the view that we assess what is considered superior in terms of the world at large. Now, the Gemara offers a third possibility. If you would prefer to say that both Brisos speak of a case where the debtor's average land is equivalent to average land of the world at large, and here it is regarding this issue that they differ. One master, the Tana of the second Brisa, holds that they assess what is considered superior in terms of the debtor's own land, while the other master, the Tana of the first Brisa, holds that they assess what is considered superior in terms of the land of the world at large. Okay, so let me just unpack what this is saying. It's saying that the Tana, the people that these great masters that wrote the Brises, were holding from two different opinions. So the Tana from the first Brisa, who states that they assess what is considered in terms of the land of world at large, makes sense. Why is he saying this? He's saying this because if you take it in terms of the debtor's own land, he's only got two grades of land. He's got average land and inferior land. So therefore, his average land is the best he has. Therefore, it's his superior land. And his next grade down would be inferior land. So obviously then, they're not using the debtor's own vantage point to assess what the land is worth from the debtor's point of view. They're assessing what is considered superior in terms of land of the world at large, because his average grade land is the best the debtor has. Therefore, according to the debtor's perspective, it's superior quality. But in terms of the world at large, it's only average quality. And therefore, he has to pay back the lender in his average quality land, even though it's the best he has, because it's assessed at the world at large. Okay. Now, the Tana of the second Brisa holds that they assess what is considered superior in terms of the debtor's own land. So in the second Brisa, he's got two grades of land, average and inferior quality land. So his average land is the best he has, and therefore that goes for damages. His inferior obviously gets paid with a woman's ketubah as everything, but his inferior quality land is inferior in terms of the world at large. But it's not judged. We don't do the assessment in terms of the world at large. According to the master of the second Brisa, we consider it in terms of the debtor's own land. And considering his average land is the best he owns, therefore it's superior from the debtor's point of view, his inferior quality of land is one step down, which is average land from a debtor's point of view. Therefore, the master of the second Brisa is saying that we look at the debtor's own land, whereas the master of the first Brisa is saying we consider superior in terms of the world at large. Okay. Does that make sense before we go on?
Yeah, clear.
Fine. Then the Gemara offers a fourth method of reconciling the Brisas. So Ravina said, he disagrees as to the correctness of a teaching of Ulla. For Ulla said, under biblical law, a lender collects from inferior land of the debtor, as it is stated, you shall stand outside, and the man from whom you are collecting will take the collateral outside to you. Now, what does a man tend to take outside as collateral? The most inferior of utensils. Thus, the creditor is entitled to collect only from a debtor's inferior land. So what's it saying? If you owe the sheriff of the court money and you've got some prized possessions, believe me, you're going to hide all your top quality stuff, and you're going to let the sheriff of the court only collect your broken TV, not your 4K 55-inch screen. That's for sure.
That's if you know he's coming.
Well, you would, because you'd see him at the gate in your property.
No, sorry.
What it's saying is here that there's two reasons that the person will pay the most inferior of utensils. The first reason is he doesn't have anything better. And the second reason is human nature, is that he's only going to pay off his debt with his worst items. Now, technically, those items can be converted to cash, which is acceptable form of payment, by the way, because the person can recover their debt. You get what I'm saying? But he will bring out the most inferior. And so makes a Gezerah Shava with the word land, that a lender can only collect from the debtor's inferior quality land. That's the biblical enactment, okay? And Ula said that the rabbis upgraded the power of the lender to collect from average quality land for the sake of the borrower, because nobody wanted to lend borrowers money because they weren't charging interest. Remember, there wasn't any vested interest. They never charged interest. And then to get back inferior land in terms of payment of cash debt was very difficult to sell. So that the door would not be locked in the face of prospective borrowers, the lenders were upgraded to collect from average land for the sake of the borrowers, not for the sake of the lender. So Rav Ula is holding that the rabbis upgraded the quality of land that the lender may collect. Ravina said this is not the case, that the biblical enactment in terms of collecting from inferior quality land of the debtor is what stands. And now we understand how this works in terms of the brisa. Because the second part of the brisa, where you collect debts from inferior quality land, is according to Ravina. And according to the first brisa of Ula's opinion of the rabbis, the debtor pays back the lender with average quality land based on the upgradement to collect from average quality land. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we are finished, and this is on page 882. Now, we're not going to go any further today because Michael isn't here, and I think we covered this, and this revision was fantastic. Gavin, ask your question now. It's the appropriate time.
Okay, sorry. So, you mentioned today specifically. That's why I raised the question. You said that the lender, and if I was a lender as well, is I would attach to a portion of land. I would say, all right, I'm going to give you 100 shekels, and this is your average land that you consider average, and I agree with you, and I attach to that land. That land, and it's got superior land. He then sells superior land, and that average land becomes superior land. But now he's still got, in effect, an attachment to that average land. So why should he be degraded if there's what's it called, damages? Why should he lose out to the damager when he's got an attachment to that land and be demoted to inferior quality land? That's my question.
Okay, good. It's a great question. Rav Chisda would completely agree with you, and so probably would I and most people. In other words, in the first situation, that's exactly what Rav Chisda is saying, is that it's attached to that property itself, because at the time of the arrangement, it's not the lender's fault that he tried to bail out the borrower, and then afterwards the borrower landed up in trouble and selling a superior quality land. And the attachment, the lien on the property, is to that property of average land. So Rav Chisda would completely agree with you. There is a discussion afterwards, just generally, as to whether or not a property lien is on that specific property or on that grade of property.
Okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
No, okay.
So that's where there's a discussion.
So that's a good point. Yeah,
you are completely correct. And in fact, when societies became immoral, where people would not honor their debts, it was attached to that specific property, and you could hold the deed of the property. Or if you buy a car from West Bank or FNB or their bank or whatever, they keep the title deed to the car. Whether it's a title deed to the property or the car ownership papers, until you've made your last payment, you don't own the car or the property. That's what a standard mortgage is. It's attached to one property and the bank lends you money, or they lend you money for the car and it's attached to the asset of the car. You only get the property papers or your asset being the property being the car, which is also belongs to you as in property once you've made the last payment. So in modern terms, because people are scoundrels, they have to attach to that particular item, and that is absolutely correct. In those days, there was a discussion whether it was to that grade of land because people were more honorable. They also lent at no interest. So your question is very sound, and I like it very much. And I want to give you an opportunity to thank you for thinking about it deeply, and also for allowing me to finish the 4 different opinions, because otherwise it would have confused everybody.
No, 100%. And